The next thing we'll do is we'll create our media queries for a wider type of layout. Currently our site doesn't read very well at a large size layout, so we're going to change quite a few things at the large size layout. I'm going to create a media query, and we'll specify the min width to be 800 pixels. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a rule for the body. We're going to be swapping out that background image and using a larger image. So I'll specify the URL. I'm going to point to the image that I have called BG1. I'm going to tell it to not repeat. And for the background position, I'm going to offset it horizontally and vertically on the screen. If we save and refresh, you can see that the image now shows up like this. I'm also going to need to set the background color because currently the background color is defaulting to white. I want that to be black. That looks a little bit better. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the section tag so that it is not quite as wide at the large screen. We'll do this by setting the margin. I'm going to set the margin on the top to 0, right will be 7 pixels, bottom will be 0, and left is going to be 98 pixels. So I'm going to push the section over quite a bit. You can see that this allows more of my image to show up here. And as I resize the screen, this of course will flow and adjust because it is responsive. The next thing that we want to take care of is the menu. I don't want the menu to be at the bottom anymore, and I no longer want this to show up. We're going to have our menu display at the top of the page here. So let's go about reformatting how the menu sits on the page. It's helpful when you're resizing the menu to see some of the current rules that you have so you'll know the things that you need to overwrite. Currently I have on the nav anyways a font weight of 700, I have padding, and I have font size. Those things are all things that I want to keep, but I want to reposition where the nav is. So I'm just going to add new styles of position absolute. I'm going to set the top to -32 pixels and the right to 0. Then we're going to make a rule for the nav li. And again, let's just verify what we currently have on the li so we're not making any redundant styles. List style type of none is something I want to keep. We'll keep the border and we'll change the padding slightly. I think what I'll do is I'll just copy these rules and then I'll know what they are so I can overwrite the ones that I don't want. The first thing we want to do is we don't want these to display stacked vertically, so I'll apply a float of left to have them float side by side. Then we're going to overwrite the padding as I mentioned. So we'll adjust the padding, and the padding is going to go to 2 pixels on the top, 6 pixels on the right and left, and 0 on the bottom. I'm also going to adjust my margin settings, and I'll set my margin to be 0 all the way around except for on the right side, and then it's going to be 15 pixels. We'll keep the background color as is. I'm going to change the text transform. Instead of using uppercase, which what it's currently using, we're going to use capitalize. This is going to allow just the first letter to be capitalized. We'll keep the border, we don't need to overwrite that. Padding we already addressed. We'll keep the background color. The display of block is something we'll keep, so we'll delete that. Text align center we want. Margin we already overwrote, as well as the text transform of uppercase. The width is something that we're going to need to deal with. So currently the width, it was at 92.5%, but you'll remember that we changed the width to 43% on our first media query that we made. So currently the menu items look like this. I want them to all be side by side, but because the width is defined at 43%, we're going to need to alter that slightly. In order to do that, I'm going to set the width value to be inherit. This is going to inherit the default width value that was originally defined on these elements. So now you can see that the width value is going to be whatever it needs to be so that the links will accommodate the text that's within inside them. That's looking much better. I'm going to get rid of the spacing so that the buttons line up flush right, and I also need to hide my trigger menu. So let's add some rules for that. In order to get rid of the spacing on the right, I'm going to target last child and set the margin on the right to 0, so only that one list item will have a margin on the right of nothing. I also need to remove the arrow image that we had added into our navigational elements, and I'm just going to set the background image to none. And then finally we'll hide the trigger as we don't need it for our larger screen design. If we save and check in the browser, now our menu looks like this. So this is something that works better at the large screen. You can see at a certain breakpoint though, we switch to our smaller screen design, and then we have the menu icon, which will take us down to the footer-based navigation. There's a couple of other cleanup things that I'd like to do here. I'm going to apply a float on the left to the promo items so that these items will actually appear in multi-column. We use a selector of .promo. I'm going to specify that I want them floated on the left, I want a width of 50%, and I want a clear of none. If we save and refresh in the browser now, you can see that the two promotional items are displaying side by side. Because I'm floating them though, we do have an issue with the section collapsing on itself. We actually want these items to appear slightly differently. We want the first two to appear side by side, but we want the bottom one actually to span the entire screen. So we're going to make some changes to the formatting, and then in addition we want our section tag to wrap around everything. We're going to need to apply a clear to the bottom of our promo wrapper. So let's do that. I'm going to go into the HTML, and you may have remembered that we had created a div with a class of promo wrapper. It's surrounding all three of our articles. Before that div actually closes, I'm just going to make another div with a class of clearit. I'll save my page, and if we refresh, you can now see that the section tag surrounds everything. So these two promotions look pretty good, but as I mentioned, this one at the bottom, I'm not really liking how that one is panning out. So we'll go ahead and we'll have this one be styled uniquely. In order to do that, I'm going to add an additional class to the last article. It'll still have the class of promo, but I'm going to also add the class of third to it. I'll go into my style.css and we'll make a new rule for .promo.third. We're going to tell this to have a width of 100%, and we're going to clear left. Remember that the promos are floated left, so we want to clear that behavior. Now if we refresh, you can see that this information now spans the width of the screen. The last thing that we want to do is on our large screen, we want that image to display. So I'm going to go back into my code and I'm going to make a rule for .noShow and tell it to have a display of block. Now when we refresh, you can see that I got the image that's showing up on the right hand side of the first article, and then I can have my additional promotions displaying side by side, as well as the last articles displaying on the page. This is coming together quite nicely. I'm just going to have the copyright text on the footer display on the right hand side, so I'll make a quick rule to overwrite the default behavior of the footer. I'm going to change the text align to right, and I'm going to adjust the margin settings. Now you can see that this text lines up on the right hand side. So this looks pretty good. I like what it does at the small size screen, at our medium size screen, and now at our large size screen. I'm just going to make one more adjustment, and this is going to be for an extra large size screen. We're going to make our promotional items appear in a 3-column layout there. So I'm going to make one more media query and make a couple of minor adjustments. We'll set the media query here for 950 pixels. And on the section tag, we're going to double the amount of spacing that appears on the left by setting the margin on the left to 200 pixels. I'm going to have my .promos have a width of 33%. And finally, we're going to have .promo.third have a width of 33% as well. And in addition, I'm going to turn off the clear by changing the clear to be a clear of none. Let's save now, and if we look in our browser, our ORCID site now displays at a 3-column layout at this extra large size screen. As my browser gets smaller, it'll jump to kind of the mid to large size screen that we've specified. And then as we continue to go smaller, it'll eventually go to our mid-size screen, and that will continue to affect the layout until we get to our very small size screen. So you can see we've done a lot of subtle nuances that change the functionality and the look of this website. There is one final thing that I'd like to do. These images are getting just a little bit too small, so let's go ahead and make a quick rule for those as well. You may have remembered in the media query for our, we'll call this small to mid-size screens. In our small to mid-size screens, we are changing the maximum width to 50%. I'm going to increase that in our large size media query, so I'm going to go into the rule that we have for the 800 pixels, and I'm going to make a new rule down here. I'm just copying and pasting what I have above, but we'll change some of these specifications here. We're going to keep the float on the left, so we don't need that. We're going to keep the margin at 15 pixels, so we don't need to change anything there. But I'm going to change my maximum width to being 100%. I'm going to set my height to auto. And now if I save and look in the browser, you can see that these images are not floating. They appear above the text. I like that layout much better. So I think that this subtle improvement makes the images work a little bit better. There is one other rule that I'm going to add in, and this is a hack for IE browsers 8 and lower, and we're going to set the width to auto, and then I'm going to use backslash and I'm going to put a 9. This isn't going to affect our layout here because modern browsers are simply going to ignore this as they don't understand, but we all know that in order to make the images flexible, we've set the max width to 100%. The max width of 100% and height of auto works in IE 7, but not in IE 8. Yes, another weird IE bug. To fix this, all we need to do is add the width of auto backslash 9, and then this will work in IE 8. It's strange, but it does work, and since we want to try to make our site as accessible as possible, we'll add that in. You can see that this has no effect on a modern browser. So there you have it. We have our fully functioning website for the Dicor Orchid Farm company, and obviously we've only built this one page, but you could build out the other pages if you were so inclined and follow the structure that we had already established. Hopefully this lesson illustrated how we could take a lot of the things that we've learned in the course up until this point and apply them on a fully functioning website.